Hello, everyone. My name is Ronald Day, and I'm a Senior Vice President at the Fortune Society, and welcome to Both Sides of the Bars. Today, we have a phenomenal guests that are going to be with us talking about a really, really important issue. The title of today's show is Raise the Gate, the case for cash assistance for people leaving prison. So I'm going to do a synopsis and then an introduction of our guests who are here today from the Center for Employment Opportunities. So the period immediately following release from prison is a time of intense vulnerability for far too many people who are otherwise ready to start rebuilding their lives. Without the ability to pay for necessities like housing and transportation or to contribute to household expenses, people leaving prison struggle to reconnect with loved ones, comply with supervision requirements, and move forward with their lives. So, to talk about this issue, right, giving cash to individuals who are being released from incarceration, we have two phenomenal guests, Simone Price and Alyssa Bradley from the Center for Employment Opportunities. I'm going to read a brief bio. So, Simone Price is the Director of Organizing at the Center for Employment Opportunities, where she oversees a program to train and mobilize formerly incarcerated people to engage in public policy advocacy, especially as it relates to reforms to their economic and civic participation. And also, Alyssa Bradley, she's a senior policy associate, also at CEO, where she works with legislatures and public agencies across New York State to generate funding, advocate for policy reform, and for legislation to be passed to remove barriers for justice impacted people. So, Alyssa, Simone, welcome to Both Sides of the Bars. And as I said earlier, I'm really excited about this conversation because there's a lot of information in the public about cash programs, but I don't know that there are or is a lot of information about cash for people who are coming home from incarceration. So one of the questions that I want to start with, and either one of you could answer, is just to clarify, what does this even mean? Like, and what's the goal? Like, what's the goal of reentry cash so that our audience have some proper context? So either Alyssa or Simone, which one of you want to take that question?
Yeah, I can go. I think thank you for having us. We're really excited to be here today and talk about some of the great work that we've been doing. And I think when we think about reentry cash, so what is it? It's a flexible, responsive intervention that helps well-positioned individuals to fill holes that are left by our differing reentry landscape. So we know that there's no singular service capable of meeting the full scope of challenges awaiting a person coming home. There has to be wraparound services available for a person who must quickly function by themselves in a community that's following years of social and economic exclusion. And what we've seen with reentry cash, and we'll talk about today specifically, is that providing individuals with direct cash assistance really gives them a chance and a little bit of breathing room so they can find a job, so they can enroll in career training and just tend to those immediate needs when they're returning home. It really sets up people for long-term successes and self-sufficiency. And it also really helps to remedy the barriers to accessing other public supports that, a lot of low income people qualify for, but that they're denied or limited to because they've been formerly incarcerated. So things like SNAP, Social Security. So, the goal of reentry cash is to really, again, provide that space for individuals to, successfully make good choices when they're coming home and set themselves up for that long-term success.
Gotcha. That's excellent context. Again, a question that typically comes up for programs like this is why cash? Because you have programs that give people like a debit card and they add money to the card and whatever. And some people always feel like if you give people cash, like they're gonna probably spend the cash on something that would not actually provide the support that they need. Like somebody want to go and buy get drunk, or somebody want to go, there's all these negative stereotypes about stuff like this. So why cash versus another method for getting funds to people?
Yeah, I'm happy to give that one a try. So I think for us, for entry cash, cash is a broad term for financial support that is unconditional. So if that financial support comes on a debit card, one that doesn't have fees, or that charges exorbitant rates, that's fine with us. But it's really just about making sure that people have unconditional means to get the support that they need based on where they are. Some folks coming home have an address to go to, some folks do not. Some have relatives or loved ones to stay with. Others will need to acquire their own housing. So again, to Alyssa's point, because there's no single solution that will serve everyone's needs and meet everyone's gaps, the most responsive and really custom solution you can come up with is this supplement of financial support. And despite the stereotypes about what it can look like for a person to receive something like unconditional support, we get to this today. Evidence proves that people do make good decisions when they're able to, meaning when they have the means to do what's best for them, they do that, and they reap the rewards that follow that.
Yeah, and I like that. I remember reading a couple of studies where they looked at cash assistance programs and it debunked a lot of stereotypes where, yes, of course you have outliers where someone spends money on something, but when you can track it, you can see that people are actually using money to pay bills. They're using money to take care of transportation needs, to buy supplies and school supplies and other stuff for kids. So all really important things. Do you believe it will improve reentry outcomes for individuals? I'm sure that that's one of the reasons why you would be doing this. Is there like some evidence, whatever, to support the idea that giving cash to people will support their outcomes in general? Either Alyssa or Simone, either one of you?
Yeah. I mean, I think what we've seen with some of the work that's, currently being done nationally on cash assistance, early evaluations of pilot programs, it shows that, people spend their money on most basic needs. So, to your point, food, housing, gas, other necessary essentials. People need this money to survive and get on their feet, and their spending will most likely be aligned with that. And, I think in terms of, you know, deterring people from, using that cash otherwise, currently people who are coming home, more than 50% of people will be unemployed or underemployed in the year following their release. And that reentry cash really provides that agency to, lead to increased and upward mobility. And there's results from places like Seed that show that cash didn't create dependency; it instead removed those barriers to secure and maintain full-time employment for people.
Excellent. Thank you for that. In this idea of creating dependency, it's like, again, there's so many negative and false stereotypes. It's like a part of what these initiatives do is really to try to set the record straight. And one also is about work. Like you're giving a person cash, does that mean that they're gonna not be likely to go to work? So what about that in this idea? Just how much cash for the audience are we talking about? Because I know we're not talking about like thousands of dollars that we're likely giving to people. What is like a typical amount for an initiative like this so that we understand how much cash people are actually receiving?
Yeah, so I'll start speaking to that, and then it would be great, Alyssa, for you to chime in and talk a little bit more about our own space. For the initiative that we have, especially for the state of New York, to try to essentially reform the gate money process, what we are trying to offer to people are monthly installments. And those monthly installments are of approximately $425. So that is the amount that individuals would have at the end of, over the course of 6 months. So the total is about $2,550 overall. Know that it's not a groundbreaking amount, it's not $10,000, it's not six figures, but what we did find, and what we do believe this initiative is powerful for, is that there is just acute income insecurity, and that initial shock post-release, which is a very disorienting time for people, especially who've been out of the workforce for decades. And there's also a cost associated with reintegration, and it's a cost that individuals ultimately are leaving facilities without the resources to overcome, and with all of the barriers to employment that Alyssa alluded to earlier. So there is a time, and there is also a stigma associated with folks who have records at all, but certainly who are recently released. and getting an individual ready and prepared to accept employment is a process in and of itself. That includes vital documents, that includes having something to wear other than maybe prison boots, which is sometimes what some of the folks in our program are coming home with. It also includes resume development and help. It includes food. So those just really immediate shocks that people have to absorb and that frankly can derail folks who are ready and are eager to rebuild their lives. That's the amount that we believe that this will be powerful for. And we believe having it happen in monthly installments is also important for folks to begin to plan and to begin to budget and to make preparations for their own futures.
Excellent. Alyssa, did you want to add something?
Yeah. And I think, that number that, $2,600, we're pushing particularly for the gate money bill in New York. There's context behind that number. There's, evidence and practice to show that, that number makes sense and, it works. And I'll give some context on a program that, we at CEO were able to run along with other reentry providers called the Returning Citizen Stimulus. So during the height of COVID, April 2020, ourselves, other partners nationally were able to raise philanthropic dollars that provided almost $4 million to around 1,800 New Yorkers who were returning home. So the vast majority of returning citizen stimulus or RCS participants reached the required milestones and received all the payments that equated to around $2,600. And that was, like Simone was saying, that were tied to specific milestones that needed to be met in programs like CEO. And, the results showed the success. There were over 90% of RCS participants that made progress on employment goals. Participants also reported that the RCS program helped them feel some level of financial stability in the period following their incarceration. And again, there's just a growing body of evidence supporting the positive impact of cash assistance for people returning home.
Yeah, that was one of the questions that I was going to ask. That's really good, context, because to say that there was an initiative, the Returning Citizen Stimulus, that has already kind of tested this like theory, can you give cash assistance to people and what will be some of the outcomes? And so it's good. This program, Fortune, was involved in that, I'm proud to say. And you mentioned that those dollars were from a foundation. What about other cash assistance projects, especially for reentry? Are they mostly, to your knowledge, funded by foundations, or some of them tax dollars? The reason why I ask is because some people have this idea, should my tax dollars be going to something like this? And I certainly believe that why wouldn't it, if you're talking about trying to increase the chances that people can be successful after return from incarceration, so you provide them with support and not leaving them to their own devices, as some states and localities ultimately do. But what about that notion of tax dollars versus foundations?
I can start with, I think, my immediate answer. So there are over now, I think, 100 plus pilots across the country to give people cash assistance. There's certainly not all cash assistance going to folks who we serve and prioritize, so people who are coming out of the criminal legal system, but they cover a broad range of sometimes specific populations, maybe single parents, maybe young parents, things like that. And for the majority, for the most part, they're absolutely funded philanthropically. So these are individual foundations or community foundations who've come together to fund a pilot. And they've proven a really powerful case study, I think. A big part of that has been doing the evaluation work, coming up with what the outcomes are and being able to speak to those. But I think the goal for a vast majority is certainly to take this to our lawmakers, to our leadership, and to let them know, like, hey, like, this is what happens when people don't have to make really hard decisions about what is ultimately a very small amount of money. I think we have pretty solid data as a nation, and certainly in the state of New York, around the costs of incarceration, for example, the cost of houselessness. So we kind of know the costs of these ills, and comparatively speaking, the cost of ensuring that folks have at least enough to take care of, again, some of the things that none of us can plan for, and other times that people just need support to navigate is far more economical.
Excellent. Alyssa, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think when we're, having these conversations, and especially when, the general public or a constituent, has concerns about where their particular tax dollars are going, it's helpful to provide that data, and especially to kind of provide context and comparison of, what we're as state, as a nation currently spending our money on, and where it could be better allocated to, you know, make sure people are successful. And I think a certain statistic that really, sits and resonates with me, and I think it's important to share out, is that the US spends more than $10 billion annually to incarcerate people. We know that that's more than anyone else on the planet, and it's less than 1% of that is spent on helping people return. So once we start thinking about remedying our over reliance on incarceration, it's easy to think about why it's important to, take that money that we're using on incarcerating individuals and use it towards, ensuring that they're going to be successful once they return, so that they don't go back. And I think just, speaking to that data, speaking to those statistics to show constituents that if their money's, allocated to something else to help support, your fellow community member and ensure that, they're going to return home and be successful. To me, that's, a really positive way of looking at why stuff like this is so important.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned the amount of money that you're advocating for, and I know this is happening in multiple jurisdictions. Are the projects usually, because you mentioned a year, are they usually about a year, or sometimes 6 months, sometimes 18 months? Is there like a kind of standard time frame?
Yeah, I'll say that for the gate money reform bill in particular, we are stretching payments across 6 months. So again, this is about that immediate financial shocks that a person needs to absorb. We've actually found installments to be really powerful, and a big part of the installment, I should also add, it's been informed by lived experience. So while organizations like CEO, Fortune Society, some other great folks, the Osborne Association, Exodus Transitional, Center for Community Alternatives, got together to distribute payments for the returning citizen stimulus some years ago. After the success of that program, we got together with a lot of recipients in particular. So again, as part of my role working with individuals who receive our services, we looked back and saw who received these payments and asked who wanted to be a part of this ongoing policy change work. And a lot of people who directly received those payments helped to inform the tenets of what we believe is not only a sound structure that has evidence-based, but that also kind of moves the needle forward in terms of how we want to see the state be responsible, and also how we want to see reentry change. So one of those key tenets, and something that people who receive cash spoke as being very critical to their own success following reentry, was receiving installments. So a big part of why we want to see that happen is because it's been informed by lived experience, and that's kind of where we've taken our cues from with this policy change.
Excellent. Alyssa, do you want to add any point to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we're speaking to cash assistance or those immediate needs, we're really, again, looking at helping with those right nows for people. Not necessarily providing them with the needs to not have a job, to stay or be unemployed. The amount we're advocating for can really provide that on ramp to continue to help with first payments for things like a car or rent, or additional resources for their employment or career trajectories. And again, as Simone spoke to, that backed evidence and that research conducted around the amount, we can more clearly defend the need for gate money to be increased if needed.
Yes. Yeah, that's helpful as well. And you mentioned like billions of dollars, 10 billion more going toward incarcerating people in the system, and a very minuscule amount going toward supporting people in their reentry. What would you say to someone who has some reservations about using money for this particular purpose, because we are about trying to change minds and perceptions. So in addition to some of the stuff that you've said already about what people ultimately use the money for, why is this like a good practice in general to do something like this? Because and I'll just say this, oftentimes programs are not doing things, giving cash out to make people feel good. They're doing things because it's really about helping to transform someone's life. So, you know, it's really good for us to inform people about why these practices are happening, especially some people who might be naysayers. We can't change everyone's mind, but I think we could add a dimension to really broaden people's horizon so that they understand an issue in a much broader context than they did previously.
Yeah, I'll just start by saying that, to Alyssa's point, $3 billion annually just in the state of New York is quite a price tag. And I think the short of it is the money is being spent already, right? Like we are spending very significant amount of money. I'm not just to incarcerate people, but if our recidivism rates are over 40%, we're spending money to reincarcerate people. So there are really only two options here. And one is that we invest in entry and invest in successful reintegration so that people no longer return to the system, or we spend money on incarceration because we are reincarcerating people who are not set up to succeed in the first place. So I think that's the first thing that I outside of our field, outside of my background, anyone else's background, if you have no personal connection to this, society, our communities are already spending money because of our dysfunctional reentry system and the fact that individuals are essentially, in many ways, only set up to return with very few exceptions. So I think that's an important point. I also think that this represents a smart public investment. So we very much consider this to be important for public spending because it's important that if we have taken away people's access to socioeconomic opportunities, so if we prevented them from working, that they were at least able to gain self-sufficiency. And that's going to require a little bit more after a person has been behind the wall for some time than it will for others. But I also want to share that independent of the personal transformation that this has on folks, those wider effects, right? So half of the people who are currently incarcerated are parents of minor children. Outside of their own individual households, our communities suffer when reentry is dysfunctional, and reentry support can help to make our communities a lot safer. One of the examples that I like to talk about is, we serve everyone coming home in New York State, but a lot of women that come through our program have also had experience with domestic violence situations, and very often it is the lack of income security that prevents them from seeking safer places to stay. Cash is linked to increases in full-time employment, to people being able to find better employment, to being able to traverse a little bit further out for a better opportunity, and to be able to keep those jobs that they're able to land. So the correlations with economic security, with self-sufficiency are very clear, very well documented. And essentially, when reentry is successful, it's far more than just the people returning will benefit.
Excellent. I think that's a great case to be made for why programs like this are actually beneficial. Alyssa, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. I mean, Simone said it really perfectly, but I think when we think about this policy, it's really just based in inherent dignity and deservedness. It's an investment that benefits taxpayers. It improves public safety. It improves the workforce. It creates sustainable opportunities for returning people and their families. And something I continue and always come back to is that thought of perpetual punishment. So when a person returns home, they should be allowed to resume their life accordingly as a providing involved citizen, a provider to their families, a community member, and it should not be held to a continued sentence and punishment, even after they've served their time and they want to restart their lives.
Yeah, thank you for that. One thing that we know, we're talking about this now, is giving cash to people, especially as they first come home, is the most critical time because people are much more likely to get re-involved in something that got them in trouble in the first place, based upon some of the economic challenges and struggles early on in an individual's release. Like the first 6 months is much more fraught with uncertainty for people after coming home from incarceration. And of course, that depends on, how much time the person did, etc. But with the couple of minutes that we have left, I wanted to ask about recommendations. We always like to kind of end offering recommendations, especially for how people can get involved. So if you're interested in supporting initiatives around cash assistance or whatever, what do you recommend for how people can support these types of initiatives?
Sorry, I was going to say I can share my first thought, and Alyssa, let me know. I think it's important that if you are someone who has a family member, relative, anyone in your in your life who you care about who has experienced incarceration, and you have any sense of the challenges that it takes to transition, you are just as valuable to this as the folks who are also being impacted personally by the criminal legal system. And again, because this is such a widespread problem, we are really looking for everyone to be engaged in the campaign. We have a website, gatemoney.org, so GATEMONEY, is a place where you can go to sign up to follow the campaign, to learn about it. We're really looking for folks to engage their own lawmakers, right? Like as constituents, to let them know that who you are, that you care about this. So this is going to be something that remains important for us for quite some time. But I think I just want to give a special call out to anyone who also does have someone in their life, that this is something that we want everyone to speak to, and that's certainly like you have a important perspective on if you've been able to kind of see just the challenges of transitioning for reentry in someone else.
Thank you. Alyssa, we don't have time to get an answer from you, but you both have done a phenomenal job explaining this particular initiative, Cash for the case for cash assistance to people who are coming home from incarceration. We think it's something that we support and we want to see lifted up. And especially, I mean, you mentioned, Simone, being a directly impacted person yourself and the family members. We all want to see people thrive after having that touch point with the criminal legal system. So thank you both for being on the show today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you so much.